Prospect House Media.
And now, prepare yourself for the only weekly podcast you won't want to miss. Welcome to the Ameritocracy Show with Troy Edgar, live from our studios in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C.
Hey everybody, I am Troy Edgar and welcome to the Ameritocracy Show. Thank you for tuning in and checking it out. It is greatly appreciated. This podcast examines the conditions for personal and professional growth and opportunity across America. This week, Ameritocracy travels to Sacramento, California, where I met Rob Stutzman. Rob is a veteran political strategist and communication expert with extensive experience in California politics. He is the founder and president of Stutzman Public Affairs, a leading consultancy that advises on political campaigns, media relations, and crisis communication. Stutzman is well known for his role as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Communications to former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger. His expertise in managing high-profile campaigns and navigating complex political landscapes makes him a key figure in political strategy, particularly within California. Rob shares his perspectives on the leading presidential candidates, their campaigns, and latest polling data. Beyond his strategic expertise, Rob is also the host of the popular podcast, Highball Politics. I hope you enjoy. Morning, Rob. How you doing?
Good, Troy. It's good to be with you.
Oh, it's awesome to see you again, man. It's been a while.
Since we've seen each other, I think that's probably right.
Yeah, we talk frequently, but I haven't been seeing you in person. And definitely during the pandemic, we took a hiatus.
Yes. Yeah, that suspended my sense of when was the last time I saw people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting as we're kind of leading up to this, a lot of excitement in a field that you're very interested in with baseball. And
yes.
We have a mutual friend who is into baseball. And I'd had somebody on the show and I made a Boston Red Sox comment and that did not go well. Did not go good. Yeah. So, but I won't do that for the Dodgers today.
Dodgers having a banner season. Very happy Dodger fan.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, thanks for meeting me here in Sacramento.
You bet.
Yeah. It always feels weird. You know, I spent a tremendous amount of time here in 2012 and, working with you, and I was running for state assembly, and it really gave me kind of an idea, a little bit of how Sacramento works and the different pieces of this, but you've had a lot of history here in Sacramento.
I have more history now than sometimes I care to admit, but my first job in Sacramento goes back to the early 90s. And so I started working, actually, prior to that, even in high school, I interned in the governor's office, Governor Duke Majan.
Oh, wow.
Pushing the mail cart. And that's really kind of how my career began. And I can draw direct lines back to that, summer of 86, graduating from high school and delivering mail around the governor's office.
Wow. Yeah, Duke Majan from Long Beach.
Yes.
Yeah. We've had somebody on the show that talked about Duke Majan when he was running the Perspective back in the day, and people couldn't pronounce his last name.
Yeah, you just went with Duke. All the signs said "Go Duke."
Yeah,
that was his nickname.
And growing up in Orange County, I thought John Wayne was running for president, so I was like, "What?"
Fair enough.
Yeah, but So, Rob. I wanted to talk a little bit, as we kind of get going, as a political strategist, a communications person, you've got a lot of great insight. I thought, a couple of things that I wanted to talk about was polling. I wanted to talk about California and its imminence. We're up here in Sacramento. This is your home turf. I know you do a lot of stuff nationally. So what I'd like to do first, though, if you wouldn't mind, is just maybe kind of give a little bit of an introduction to the audience of, you said you grew up, went to high school. Where did you start out in high school, and how did you end up here in Sacramento?
So high school was in Auburn, California. So it's just northeast of Sacramento, about 35 miles. Went to Placer High School, but kind of a world away from Sacramento. That was where people commuted to, but there was life was centered up there in Auburn. I had a great civics teacher named Sandy Silberstein, who went on to be a lobbyist in a post-teaching career of her own, who really encouraged me to just apply, put in your resume to the governor's office, and somehow I bamboozled my way in there. They let me push the mail cart around. And that allowed me to have relationships. I came back and interned again the next year and used that to propel an early career.
Can I ask you went to college in San Diego, if I remember.
Point Loma Nazarene College.
Wow.
Right.
That's a great school, great place. I was in the Navy and submarine base right there.
Just on the other side of the peninsula.
Yeah. So what took you down to go to school?
Well, I was, at least my high school years, grew up in the Nazarene church. Okay. And so it became a natural place for me to look at. I don't think I've really considered anywhere else. They probably wouldn't have let me into a lot of other places. So I chose Point Loma very early. Loved my liberal arts philosophy degree that I got from there. And it's one of the most gorgeous campuses, of course, in the world. I look back wondering why I was in such a hurry to graduate. I always made fun of those guys over there 7 or 8 years, but looking back on that, they might have been the smartest guys in the school.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, didn't jump right in like some of us did and try to fight our way through. When you got out, you came immediately back up here then to Sacramento?
Yeah, I started with, so some of my background was very conservative, evangelical focused. I had the bug for politics. I was kind of the Michael P. Keaton, for those that are old enough to remember Family Ties. Didn't have the Nixon lunchbox, but I probably had the equivalent of the Ronald Reagan lunchbox. So I had the bug for politics. Started with this, it was a nonprofit group that worked on what we'd call pro-family policies at that time, had a relationship with Focus on the Family and Dr. Jim Dobson's organization. So I started with them for a couple of years. And then bounced into doing staff work for electeds, worked for Congressman Richard Pombo and did some campaigns in '94, ended up in the state capitol, and eventually running communications by the end of the decade in the 90s for Attorney General Dan Lundgren, who ran for governor in '98 and lost. Spent some time consulting, became kind of the main mouth for the Republicans in California. And so when the recall of Gray Davis occurred, I was kind of a natural slot for me to slide into with Schwarzenegger, and rode through the recall with him, went into government, ran communications for him for the first couple of years, and they say the rest is history.
So Gray Davis, that's around 2003.
The recall was in 2003. That's right.
Yeah, that had to be surreal. You were the voice of politics going to a Hollywood star that's kind of dipping his foot in and trying to make a difference.
It was surreal, partly because of just the story of how it all started. The people that were starting Schwarzenegger campaign had been in touch. All indications were he wasn't going to run. Myself and some others had tickets. We got to go to the Tonight Show that night when Arnold was there with Leno, and we all expected Arnold to indicate he wasn't going to run. That's what all the indications were. In fact, I was going to go have dinner that evening with my then business partner, Dan Schnurr, with the former baseball commissioner, Peter Uberoth, because he was going to run.
Oh, wow.
And when Arnold announced that he was running, I almost passed out in the studio audience. You were blacked out from using your phone, so we had to wait for the show to end to get out of the studio.
Wow.
Jewel was the musical guest. I can't remember anything she sang. I just wanted her to hurry up and finish.
I love Jewel.
I do too, but wasn't there for that night. Wasn't going to there to see her that night. Ended up at Arnold's house that evening, and the 10-week campaign launched.
Wow.
So it was surreal to be doing that work with Arnold, but also not with very little preparation for any of us. We were shocked that he had made that decision.
So very similar to, you see at a national level, if a president not expected to win comes in, has to build a government from scratch. Talk a little bit about Arnold's process. He's a known business person, and so it's not like he doesn't know how to manage organization, but it'd be pretty interesting to see this thing starting to pick up steam. There's kind of a campaign side and a side that's potentially working towards transition. Did you kind of bridge between those? Because you would eventually be the kind of the beachhead of this new administration.
I was a bridge because I was the first hire into the governor's office, because the day after the election, the first thing you kind of need is a communications director,
Right.
not a policy person.
That's right.
And so I slid right into that role immediately. And then Arnold, built his initial administration relying upon a lot of Pete Wilson veterans.
Mm-hmm.
Pete had been governor in the 90s, 2 terms. Attracted a lot of smart, good people to his administration. I think his administrations have aged well in terms of their governance. And I think a lot of people that never would have gone back into government did so because it was Schwarzenegger. And then there was also a balance to that where people that were from Arnold's world and came into the administration. Mm-hmm. And I look back on those years and think it was actually kind of a nice collaboration between his people, which were important to him, and the people he was getting to know, who were all of us that were the Sacramento insiders, mechanics, people that knew about government. Arnold's a very smart guy, got on a quick learning curve, put in the work, and kind of got into his rhythm of how he wanted to govern pretty quickly.
Yeah. And a part of his governorship, I was a city council member and mayor of my city, and he came to the Los Alamitos military base that we had, the Joint Forces Training Base. And, we had a CalFEMA there. So a lot of times he'd stop in and, traded his Hollywood, nice suits for the state jacket with the California emblem, Arnold on the top.
The big seal.
Yeah.
He loved those jackets.
He definitely, he did the job. He really kind of jumped into it full steam. And, you see a lot of people in politics that they want to be somebody, not do something. I really felt like when he came in, he wanted to do something.
He absolutely was a doer, and he had a big agenda. He had a big agenda to transform government. A lot of that got curbed by the reality of checks and balances with the legislature. And then ultimately, even at the ballot, with some ballot measures that we tried to do that would have been big reforms, but ran headlong into public labor unions and got into a big, expensive ballot fight over that. But I really admire that he tried all those things. It's what an outsider should do when they come in, which is to try to be a change agent.
Mm-hmm. When you're dealing with somebody that knows how to communicate with the public, do you ever find yourself kind of in a situation where the boss wants to tell you how to communicate back and forth? I think it would be tough.
Look, I was a communications director for the most famous person in the world outside of the Pope, right? Yeah. I mean, it's like, pinch me. Yeah. Chris Matthews, we had his hardball show back then. Yeah. And he called, he pitched me. He wanted to do these campus shows, and he wanted Arnold to come down and do the show with him. And it's like, we're not doing that. I mean, Schwarzenegger and I would work really well together on how to appropriate him and when and how. And I really enjoyed that interaction with him because he was very strategic about how to do that. So ultimately, I'm turning down Matthews, and he goes, "Dang, Rob, don't you realize that 49 other communications directors for governors across the country would be begging me for the opportunity to do this?" And I'm like, "Yep, but I don't have to, Chris." It was a lot. It was a lot of that. It was more. It wasn't as much about pitching things as people in my job typically do, as much as it was kind of regulating the exposure and how to use Arnold's appearances in the most effective way to help him govern.
It's kind of a interesting juxtaposition to today's governor, who I think tries to use the media for a lot of different things, but not maybe as strategic always, just from what I see. And I spend most of my time in DC, but where Arnold, like you said, you almost have to turn the volume down a little bit and make sure he's not overexposed. And so when he did weigh into stuff, it would make a difference, right? And he isn't always, his brand never, his brand seemed from my side like you had to be a little bit careful because it was much more broad reaching than Californians. And so it would seem like there would be a little bit of a hard time trying to kind of like, hey, guy, it's the 38 million here, that we need to talk to because, he's known internationally. And even some of the stuff that you guys would do for the state would be picked up. And you feel like that was a hard thing to kind of moderate a little bit?
He was very squared away in understanding who he needed to be communicating with. But he did have... how he was perceived around the world was still important, right? Because he's a national brand. Yeah. I mean, he does a ton of advertising in Japan. He's especially sensitive to how he's thought of in Europe, especially back home in Austria. So we were mindful of there was times to service those constituencies, if you will. But it was always clear where the voters were. In fact, on the recall, we had a lot of foreign press on the press bus. A lot of people begging for interviews. All the top American anchors were coming in. Brokaw and Jennings at the time were giving them interviews, of course. And I'm pretty sure that this one French journalist was basically the Tom Brokaw of France, begging to get on the bus and interview him. And I was like, dude, we don't have any time for that, and there's no voters in France.
Yeah. A lot of judgment call happens at the communication director, and it's I think it's a little bit interesting. It's like you could make calls that he definitely would be interested in, vice versa, or do you always, when you're dealing with someone at that level and that profile, does he kind of turn over once he kind of gets into groove with you and says, hey, Rob, and then by year 2, 3 on, you guys are like, Rob's got it. I'm not worried.
It was all, I think that the process was, he understood what I was trying to do, trying to be strategic and sync it with policy. I understood, got a feeling of what he liked to do, didn't like to do. Anything we did, the visuals, coming from his cinematic background were important. And frankly, it was an important way to communicate.
Right.
So we would plan out weeks in advance, and I'd come to him with options and proposals and suggestions, and we'd collaboratively work through those things together. We did hit a point, it was interesting. There was so much theater involved in the campaign. Like we actually destroyed a car with a wrecking ball in a junkyard to symbolize abolishing the car tax on day one, which we did. As you got into governor, I had to be sensitive to where's that time to start nuancing him into looking like governor instead of entertainer, stunts and some stagecraft that was maybe more prevalent during campaigns. We still had a good share of it, but at some point people wanted to make sure, well, that's actually a governor we have up there, right? Someone in a suit behind a podium from time to time. Yeah.
So as Schwarzenegger's time came and you started moving off, talk a little bit about what you've done since then and what you're doing now.
So, post Schwarzenegger, it's been a life of consulting. Was partner in a firm that was based in D.C. that was both public affairs and lobbying, Navigators, global. I was still based out in California, but we ran communications programs nationally in D.C., a couple other state houses as well, Tallahassee in particular. And then 2009 economy crash, and it looks like D.C. has gone completely Democrat forever. And we were a Republican lobbying firm, and so things slowed down. It was at that time that myself, Mike Murphy, who was one of my partners there, we both basically just took our businesses out and became independent. And so I've been based here in Sacramento ever since then, just as Stutzman Public Affairs, and collaborate with a lot of good partners here in the state and across the country. And what I enjoy about consulting is being a generalist, jumping into a variety of issues, and being able to help solve. Everyone has a unique path, whether it's regulation, litigation, legislation that they need to help with strategically, than how messaging, helps achieve their objectives.
So do you balance between associations, between political campaigns, a lot of different stuff? You and I joke, I don't joke about it, but I think it's pretty cool. Is like a lot of times I see you will be on news shows. You'll be in op-eds, either directly writing them or indirectly quoted. And so, it's got to be kind of interesting. I'm sure that helps your business too, but it's also, you have a perspective that seems to still be something that's very important, and to get a kind of a direction. How do you balance that type of work with some of your consulting stuff that you do?
Yeah, it's a good question. I definitely have a strong perspective on certain things, especially national politics and what's happened to the Republican Party since 2016. I'm still Republican, but haven't voted for the nominee now in the last 3 elections. As I mailed my ballot off this week. And at the same time, where I have opinions about that, I have concerns about the direction of the Republican Party. I think I'm part of a group. I don't know if I'd call myself, there's a professional Never Trump class that I don't associate with. I think they've do what they do sometimes for profit motive, and aren't as clear-eyed about where to take things. I did some work with No Labels earlier in the year. If they had named a candidate, I was set to run their super PAC along with Jeb Bush's former chief of staff, Kathleen Shanahan. Of course, they didn't get a candidate. So I'm interested in finding where are we still going to have a classical liberal, conservative, right of center type of political party, or where do voters like that go? As I see the Republican Party just drift into nativism, protectionism, isolationism, which I think is dangerous, and yet a Democrat Party that this election has started to appeal to voters like me, but really hasn't opened their arms wide open yet. So who's going to get to a governing majority coalition, by being able to capture everything that's left and right of center? I've got a lot of opinions in that, and I haven't gotten into this business in politics if I didn't care about some of these things. Now, having said that, as much as I have opinions in that space, I think reporters come to me because they think they're going to get a straight analytical shot on things, not a spin on things, especially in California. Like it or not, I've become a bit of one of those old elder statesman guys who've been around a while. So I try to interpret, analyze, and explain for the most part, if you see me quoted in the press. And then when it comes to my clients, my job is to be somewhat dispassionate and put together a right strategy for them, which for one client may mean opposing a chairman of one committee, and for another client, it may mean trying to make that committee chair a hero on an issue. And so at the end of the day, what you're obligated to your clients for is not your opinion, but your ability to analyze and execute a strategy to help them achieve their objective.
When it comes in between like TV, radio versus writing, what do you prefer to do most? Because I see you've written a lot of stuff too.
I do enjoy the writing. Finding places to publish anymore has become a little challenging. I was invited by the Washington Post to do some analytical writing ahead of, really in 2019 during the Democrat primary, and it was probably published about eight pieces or so, half of which have aged well, maybe the other half not so well, as they do. I've been invited. CNN had me back to New York on Anderson's desk for the Newsom recall night because they, obviously needed a Californian. I guess at the end of the day, right now, writing still, I think, is the most valuable. Just where to, I'm contemplating, how to do that best and have it published. Maybe it is Substack, or maybe there are these emerging new media publications that will also potentially give voice to some things I have to say.
Wanted to talk to you a little bit about polling and maybe more in the context of breaking up your business a little bit for candidates. You and I have had discussions over the years of different races, people coming to you saying, hey, look, I'm interested in potentially running. Usually the first discussion is, do you have any idea on the beat on the area that you're running, especially if it's a federal race that's got a big area, or a Senate race that's got a big area for state Senate. So the first step is to kind of take a look in polling, and I remember that with you. And so one of the things that I wanted to be able to kind of go through a little bit is, with all of the activity going on around major elections, polling seems to be really kind of front and center. And a lot of people that I deal with, I'm in the corporate world. So, you see Wall Street Journal polls versus NBC polls versus, Real Clear Politics. You got all these different brands. You almost got to be going second or third level, as some people think some of them are biased or not accurate. But, and you and I have talked about this off mic, is I'm a quant guy. I can't help it. Probability and statistics are real. They mean something. But I think the part where people lose it is potentially the process that they put in place to do whatever the sample is. And I thought something that I've always admired when you and I've had discussions is, it's not easy like just saying I need a poll. It's like the 15 questions to break down to what type of information. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I always think that's fascinating.
Yeah, and let's clarify, there's two types of polling. There's a type of polling that I use privately for a race, which I don't necessarily care so much as what the head-to-head says. I'm looking for the messages that are going to move the numbers. So maybe I'll just walk through it for a second. So if I do a poll for a candidate, we're going to ask some basic questions to warm you up, right track, wrong track, your favorabilities on the president, the governor, et cetera. Have you ever heard of? So you get a baseline for that. And then you do a head-to-head. Say it's a state assembly race, election held today. So there you have a baseline. Then you move through a battery of push and polling against each candidate that more or less would simulate an election. What if you heard this, good or bad? What if you heard this, good or bad? And then you ask the ballot question again, and you see what that number is. And then through the crosstabs, you're able to go back and see, well, which message moved voters the most. And it starts to help you develop a game plan of, well, what are we going to go talk about in this campaign? What do we need to talk about? And which voter segment do we need to talk to about it because they can come our way? Or who do we need to talk to make sure they don't leave us similarly? So that's the way we use polling from a campaign perspective. What we're obsessed with in the media is all the horse race polling, which is very different.
Okay.
And they get right into it with people. And they just ask the first, that first ballot question on where they're at. Of course, the methodology of all that was called into question after the 2016 race when they wildly missed Trump voters. And the reason they wildly missed Trump voters was because it was a lot of voters who had never voted before. Trump changed the electorate. In 2020, they arguably still underestimated the Trump vote, but accurately had the election. I think 2020 got closer to margin of error. And then in 22, in the midterm, polling kind of missed it the other direction, right? They overcalculated what they thought was going to be Republican strength in the midterm. The bottom line with what I see is when pollsters have the most trouble is when Trump is on the ballot. And so this year, by the time some people hear this, we'll know the outcome. But all the polling this year seems to, in my view, somewhat be accounting for that. Harris is not anywhere near the Biden numbers in a lot of important constituencies. The polling shows Trump making real gains with Hispanic voters and young African American voters. If that manifests itself, we'll know in the weeks ahead, of course. So part of me is curious to see if now they've overestimated on Trump, or is it still underestimated and he ends up with a substantial margin of victory. My guess is, the polls have been almost statistically inexplicably close, depending on which poll. You put all the polls together and they're pretty much all the same. You get a little outlier here and a little outlier there, but that real clear political average, which just puts them all together, has remained pretty constant. I think arguably, no matter the outcome of the election, we're going to be able to say that polling was pretty much within the margin of error, which is something people forget about. The media does a real disservice when they run a headline that says, Trump gains 2 points on Harris since the last poll. Well, the margin of error on these polls is 2 to 4 points. So it's statistically insignificant if a poll has moved 2 points. And I think now on this election in particular, it has been margin of error since the end of the summer, and this election probably gets decided within that margin of error.
So when you're looking at this, Kamala Harris being from California, she was our U.S. Senator. I dealt with her when I went through Senate confirmation. I actually didn't deal with her because she wouldn't meet. But, it was kind of interesting is, when I was going through Senate confirmation, there was a lot of people going through at the same time. And, their senators would actually see them. They would talk, even if they're on the other side of the party, it just as a courtesy. But it was just kind of interesting. You start to see like the legislature, somebody was always a big supporter and helpful, especially when I was a mayor, was Dianne Feinstein. I think the hardest part for me, Rob, and I think I share this with you, is when I did go through Senate confirmation, they had to file cloture and actually do a vote on the floor. And so you get to watch the senators walk down the aisle and give a vote of yes or no. And
you were literally in that Roman Coliseum.
Yeah. It's like they walk up and I'm watching it on C-SPAN, and I see, Kamala Harris like then, like, okay, that's okay. It didn't hurt. Feinstein walked out. She's like super, she's always been really good, especially for California and Orange County. And she's like, And I'm like, whoa, that hurt. It was like, I didn't expect it, but I mean, that's politics.
Well, you're caught up in a larger political theme.
I think what's interesting is like, the interactions with Kamala when I was going through that, she had been a senator, but she was already starting to try to run for president at that point it's kind of interesting as I really hadn't seen her settle down into this, race. And with this process, it doesn't seem like they've had enough time to totally get to know her, after kind of the abridged entry. And I was just curious, I know you've had interactions. One of the things that you said in one of the articles that you wrote back, I think maybe for her 2020 run, is somebody asked about her time as AG, when Attorney General for California, and you had made a comment that she came in after the 2008-9 bust, when we had the real estate problems, and she was really dealing with those problems in housing and dealing with President Obama and trying to get the right levels, and ended up doing fairly good in that deal, even though that didn't really meet her campaign pledge and her platform, And so I was just kind of curious your view of interactions and seeing her from Sacramento.
Harris her career has been very carefully, I call it curated, right? One of these very careful politicians. Since she's attorney general, she kept her head down a lot. She never would go. I mean, when you're attorney general, you can go do all the top cop stuff you want. Mm-hmm. She did very little of that. She primarily defined herself as a consumer advocate-driven AG. Her big, probably biggest signature of AG was a big settlement with a mortgage lender that she played a role in. But there was big ballot measures at that time having to do with criminal justice reform, which are now on the ballot again to actually undo some of that in California this year. The death penalty was on the ballot during her tenure as Attorney General, and she passed on all of this. And she has this excuse that, her office prepared the ballot title and summaries that go on the ballot. She thought she should stay out of it. No Attorney General before and not the two since have adopted such a policy. It's just kind of a nonsense way of staying out of things. Then she gets to the U.S. Senate and begins to prepare for her next, which is to run for president, which means she has to position herself far to the left. She took 3 or 4 different positions on single payer healthcare. She's out there now on the issues like what Trump's just battering her with on TV ads about taxpayer-funded care for transitioning prisoners.
Yeah, in detention.
Detention, including undocumented. It's just everything she had to do to say anything it would take to win. And one of the reasons I think she failed was because you almost could tell she didn't mean it. So she's one of these politicians I would say is typical, that she's willing to say what needs to be said to win. And that's what we've seen now in this general election. She isn't encumbered with a primary. Right. So all of a sudden fracking, same values, but it's fine with me. Yeah. I was a prosecutor. Yeah. Well, okay. Well, you never talked about being a prosecutor, even when you were a prosecutor, when she was attorney general. Right. So there's 2 ways to look at that. You can look at it very cynically, but you can also look at it as, well, if she's willing to move to the center in order to get votes from the center, if she wins, she's obligated to that voter coalition, and extremely more likely she would govern in a way to keep that voter coalition to gain a re-election. So, look, a politician who's somewhat transactional and is actually going to follow the electorate to where a majority is, to me, just isn't necessarily incongruous with what the founders had in mind.
Yeah, it's interesting being in local politics, seeing at the county, the state, and federal. You do see those 2 different types of brands of politicians. I know a couple politicians very well that they're so tepid to make any move that they almost need to see which way the wind's blowing first. And I think being a corporate guy, and that's my background. It's like that's what I struggle with is I need strategy. I need somebody that's thought through this 5 years out, potentially looked at the 3-year checkpoint, and over the next 90 days, what are we doing? And when you push into these people, I had a law professor when I was at MBA school at USC. He used to call it an eggshell skull. Like you push into their skull and there's nothing there and it just breaks through. And it's like, I look for, regardless of whatever way people vote, if you got somebody that just comes out and declares we're going this way, right or wrong. And then you got somebody that's like, do you want to go that way? No tax on tips. I'm going there too. And so you just, I don't know. It'll be interesting to kind of see where it's at. But I got another question on polling.
Yes.
So, in Vegas and in a lot of different areas, they're starting to do gambling on elections. And poly market, if you're familiar, kind of a market that's actually looking at now starting to take. It was in the Wall Street Journal 2-3 weeks ago. They have full articles on really kind of this thing that's happening. And I have a lot of corporate guys that love sports betting. They do this. Their view is it's so scientific. When they watch college football, you and I talked about this. You see Nebraska versus Ohio State over the weekend, 23-point deficit towards Ohio State, and you're thinking, will Ohio State be able to beat that? And so they've done game simulations, whoever these people are that do these odds, and they get down to like predicting and something that should be at 23, the next team wins by 24 points out of all that stuff. So a lot of people like that are not familiar with polling in the political sense, may be familiar more with sports. They're like, how come the poly market is so far different than the polling? Is there more information available? Are they doing game simulation, much more sophisticated? Because I go back to what I said, 5-10 minutes ago. It's probability and statistics. You can do game simulation, but I think you are trying to get data points and make some sort of sense of it. What's your view?
Well, so who kind of started this was the Cambridge University project, Predictit, which is where I've played around a little bit. I haven't looked that hard at Polymarket, but I read and follow where it's at. It's like 2-1 Trump over or Harris as we speak. It's hard to know what type of herd mentality there is in these markets as opposed to sharps. I mean, in the sports betting markets, right? You're watching, if you're really paying attention, you're watching for that line to move a certain direction, and that means the sharps have come in, the people that are doing all the analysis, or get to a point spread or money line they like, and then there's something to be said about trying to follow that trend instead of just the herd. I don't think we have. The participation in those betting markets, I think, has grown to the extent I don't think we know if there's any value in it or not.
Yeah.
I don't know what the sample is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's part I struggle with a little bit, is that the scientific method, it's a little unclear, what it's really built on. And, even in sports, like if you can see movies on it, right? People can do game simulations and you can kind of see, okay, I could see how they can come to that. But with politics, I'm not really sure, if you took
predictive analytics is really where it's at. So instead of the polling, the predictive models, I think, are important. And in campaigns, we are using predictive models. And so, what that means is you take the input from quantitative research, massive sample quantitative research, be able to tag people in certain broad ideological strokes that you can analyze, the lookalikes, people like that. And then you let a computer run it 1,000 times.
See where it goes.
And get 1,000 outcomes and come up with percentages. And so the models I have seen in the last month, and then what's out there publicly, suggests a Trump victory. So as much as the polling we scrutinize, it'll be interesting to see how well all these predictive models have worked as well. And with the predictive models, you get different variances of what the turnouts look like, et cetera. And then, they'll say, well, if it's 33% for Harris, but she wins, it was wrong. Well, no, the least likely happened. Yeah.
So let me ask you this, Rob, is kind of in closing, when you start looking at the political communications and the different things that you're seeing, the different mediums, different ways of contact, social media, back in the day when we did 2012 election, mail was a big deal. at $25,000 to $40,000 per mail piece. People don't realize, like, when you get those mail pieces at your house for a state or a federal candidate, they're paying the cost of a car and they put out 20 of them or more in a campaign. But I was just kind of curious, your view now, and let me just add one little bit to it. So social media, like, for example, Orange County, somebody wants to run for county supervisor, one of 5 districts. They bring somebody in like yourself, say, hey, I want to run. They say, hey, we're going to put together a social media campaign. Social media is not discerning of just District 1 or whatever. It's the nation. And so when you start putting ads out, but it seems like now it can be so targeted that it can start to collect demographics and maybe hyper influence. And I was just kind of curious your view of the communication approaches in campaigns, and especially as it pertains to these new ways of going out that may be much more cost effective than $30,000 a shot. What's your view?
So, so the thing about direct mail is it's still the only purely addressable piece, medium that you can use. There is a lot of evidence that voters, especially older voters, retain that information. And as much as people say they throw it right in the trash, I've sat in focus groups my whole life where the same person that says they threw the mail right in the trash 10 minutes later recites back everything they know about the candidate that was in the mail piece. So I don't think mail is going anywhere. It's getting more expensive, mainly from postage rates. But digital, this is really the cycle where digital and TV have merged. There's so many ads that can be served digitally onto the big TV screen, which does allow for a lot of efficiency and targeting. And so, digital used to mean, banner ads in the Orange County Register. I mean, now it means dropping a 30-second ad into someone's show while they're watching it streaming or a smart TV. As well as getting to all their screens, right? Whether it's the desktop, phone, tablet, etc. So, paid media is really now merged in the one dashboard. That is clearly the future. How that then you're able to do that and insert yourself and interact into these social streams, particularly the ones run by Meta, TikTok as well. Although how to engage in TikTok, you don't pay for it the same way. You have to pay for the quote unquote influencers to create content. And we don't really know what the future of that will be on that platform,
coming
obviously.
Up really quickly.
Yeah. So it's always evolving, but there's no question the screens that we all walk around with is not just the future of campaigns. It's the here and now of campaigns with still a little bit of direct mail.
Do you see the cost of campaigns coming down? Or do they pretty much staying the same or going up higher?
So what's happened with that, Troy, is that the cost you maybe get more efficient.
Yeah.
But it's so much easier to raise money now. I mean, this is one of the reasons our politics have gone so populist. Is the fundraising's gone populist. So it used to be that. I mean, this is how Harris raised $1 billion, right? She's doing it through small donations. From millions of people. So campaigns now will have enough money. Even I think at state and local levels, if you're doing it correctly, you can raise enough money to do what you need to do. So it's not a question of whether the campaigns will get cheaper. It's that they're going to have more money than ever, I think, to spend.
To do.
Yeah.
Well, I it's awesome to be able to have the opportunity to catch up with you and I mean, it's been a while since we've been able to break some bread together, man.
Well, this is great. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah. And when you come back to DC, we're going to have to get together. I got a place at the Palm.
Right.
So I need to be able to have you come out there and spend some time. And it's always good kind of catching up and seeing kind of what's going on with you.
Likewise. Yeah. It's been a good time.
Yeah. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, buddy. Thanks again for joining me today on the Ameritocracy Show. Be sure to follow me on social media and our website at troyedgar.com, where you can get more information and sign up for my weekly email. I hope you have a great week.